I want to know what that meant. What's the date, Jeannie?
We can ask him later, but we're live now, so
Okay.
everybody is, let's see if anybody was waiting for us. Every now and then, I'll have a situation where, let's see, where people will be in the lobby waiting for us, which is a good thing. And let's see, nobody was waiting for us today, but yet here we are. And now, of course, at the last minute, people who didn't want to get in earlier or who were too busy to reply. And let's see, saying, nobody was waiting for us today, but as if I didn't tell everybody. So, let's see. I'm just going to send the link. And it's our friend Tiffany, so I'll let her get away with it. But what I wanted to ask about today wasn't necessarily, is education good? I don't want it to sound that way. I don't want to say, is school good or is school bad? But the discussion I've been having with a lot of people, especially a lot of young men who come to me for advice, talk about my generation. I'm Generation X. I'm 42 years old this year. They said that I'm one of the last ones who were able to go to school, get out, and actually pay it off. And my argument to them, even though a lot of them have come at Eswar, can you mute yourself? This is not your first rodeo, Eswar. Mute yourself so we don't have to listen to your background.
All right.
Because your volume is chopping up. But a lot of them ask me about the value of education, and I come from a very old-fashioned way of looking at school that has helped me. My belief that is there's a lot of people who can get away with not having an education. No Black immigrant or Native American under any circumstance can be afforded that luxury. That if your skin is brown or you are an immigrant in America, you have to have an education just to break even. Just to get to the point where you can be at zero, you must have an education. I understand how expensive it is. I understand that people are coming out with a lot of debt now. I understand that it's a horrible situation to be in, but I still believe that it's worth it because for me, for my life, it's been working. I mean, all of us here have traveled, and my premise is I've been to places like Japan where you can't even get more than a visitor's visa without some form of university education. Why? Because they look at it and they understand if you have an education, the odds on you ever being a detriment or a drain on society are much lower. Is anybody with me on that? Anybody can feel free to jump in.
Can I speak to that? I have a slightly different experience. I respect your opinion, and I wholeheartedly believe it. I'm a baby boomer, and I'm about 18 years older than you are. So when I was coming up, at least certainly all of my grandmother has had a master's degree. My father had he went into the Air Force. He had higher education, and it was expected. I went to a college preparatory high school, and it was expected that I would go to university as well. Well, the good Lord had different plans. So I actually dropped out of high school when I was 16. I was planning to go to Cornell, but that didn't happen. So long story short, after a few years of living in the hood, and I call it my lesson in socioeconomics, living in the hood, I ended up going back to school, and I only went for about a year and a half of college. After that, my father was a broadcast professional, and I wanted to go into broadcasting as well. So I did an internship in Virginia, and through the internship, I was hired as a producer. And so here I am with a year and a half of college, and I was producing newscasts, and I learned a lot very quickly. And I learned that in the broadcast industry, the practical that at that time, we're talking about the early 90s, it was imperative that you know what you're doing. So the education, while it was let me just fast forward. So long story short, from then you start to get the recruiters start to go after you. So I was getting recruited after having 2 years of experience. Now I got recruited to New Orleans to Philadelphia to Detroit to Washington, D.C., Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles, where I stayed in Los Angeles a long time with CBS News. And then from there, so anyway, so the higher education wasn't a requirement at that time. And finally, I ended up going to, after 20 years, I was at News 12 The Bronx. I was general manager and news director. I've been, running news departments for 20 plus years, managing multi-million-dollar budgets, having a staff of 100. And my senior vice president, who I reported to, I remember saying to him, I need to go back to school. I said, I need to get my, I need to go back to school and get my degree in business administration. And he said, an older Jewish man, he said to me, you don't need to go back to school. He said, I'll teach you everything you need to know. And I found that interesting because my father used to always tell me, people of color need to have, he would say, a rabbi, a teacher. And I found that, at least in my experience, I'm 60 years old. So what was true for me back then, I don't think is true now. And I agree with you, Yusef. In order just to get in the door to compete, you have to have a higher degree. When I was coming up, I did not. I think I'm a rare gem. And actually, when I was a hiring manager, hiring reporters and anchors and whatnot, I wasn't recruiting people. Even your Generation X's, I was not recruiting people who had high degrees. The level of experience was important, but I do think I'm actually torn, because I do think you have to have the higher degree to get in the game. But at the same time, I think the education system is in America is ripping people off, and these young people get caught with all this massive debt. So I'm actually torn. I don't know. My youngest daughter is entering her junior level of school, and she has zero debt. She's been able to get 100% scholarships. So that's helpful. So I don't know how to advise young people today because of the debt situation. So I wanted to just weigh in on that regard. I didn't need it. Really quickly, I shared this with you yesterday, Yusef. My sister, who's 10 months younger than I am, she has a PhD. And at one point, she was making $35,000 a year. And I have some college, and I was making $150,000 a year, up to $225,000 a year. So so sometimes I think it's who you know, obviously, and who your mentor is. Mentors are very, very important. And perhaps I belong to the National Association of Black Journalists, for instance, and we have a saying, each one teach one. And I think that's very important, that if we can, as a community, each one teach one, that will help. I'm not necessarily answering your question because I don't really know how I feel about it. I'm on the fence today.
I want to piggyback off of what Lisa said about her background and skills, because I also have my degree in journalism, and I'm 45 this year. And I remember meeting individuals like Lisa, who were, giants in communications and media, and some of them did not have degrees, and they would boast about this. And here we are, interns, trying to get put on, so to speak. And there were people in front of us who didn't have degrees. And I'm like, well, how do they do that? And here we are amassing all of this debt. I literally just finished paying my debt last year, and I graduated in 1996, so my point is, what Lisa is saying is very valid, and what Yusef is saying is very valid. She also mentioned having a rabbi. Her dad said a rabbi, and mentoring. And I think, and the NA, the Black Journalists Association, we were told to join all of these organizations. Networking was a very big word in the 90s when I was in college. And I think that is still valid. It's still necessary. And I think you get that from a traditional university education. But, I really think that whole atmosphere may not be as necessary when you are an immigrant or an expat. Because now, with me and my daughter living abroad, she may not be in that traditional university setting. She may, live here in Veracruz, and she could be attending a school in Maryland, for instance, virtually. So while I do agree that a university education is important because we are Black, it's something that will get us in the door. But what does that look like now? I have a 10-year-old. So what is that going to look like in less than 10 years? And how is she going to build this network? I mean, it's still happening because we're all virtual now, everything is online. But yes, I agree with you, Yusef. To get back to your point, I agree with you. I think a university education is important, but at the same time, I'm very open to my daughter going to a trade school. I try to teach her to be solutions oriented. I'm encouraging her to learn coding and building applications. I think it's important to have a diversified skill set. And yes, you do have to be certified in something. You do have to have some type of formal backing.
Let me make a quick interjection. I have nothing against trade schools. I have nothing against what we would call blue collar jobs. That's not what I meant, because I know that it's an education just like anything else. What I am saying is that right now I'm being inundated with a lot of young men who see on the face of it, well, listen, I can make money online. Well, that's great. The problem is it short-term money that's dependent on current trends and fads, or is it long-term money dependent on fundamentals of education? I have friends that dropped out of university back in the late 90s because they were making $80,000, $90,000 a year in 1998, 99 coding for websites. Yet within 10 years, without having a degree in technical something or other, the fact that they could make a website meant absolutely nothing. Yet those of us who went to school for, and I want to be clear, I'm very prejudiced. I believe in STEM education, science, technology, engineering, math. There are a lot of things you can do. And of course, I went into management and I did a few other things, but my career that really put me ahead of the curve was basically math, because I dealt in finance. I dealt in long-term care, mutual funds, life insurance, math in that direction. But what I keep seeing is, as I rapidly approach maturity, the more I look back and say, a lot of those old-fashioned things that was beaten into my head are the slow way to make money, but the money that I've been able to make and the businesses I've been able to open and close in some instances have been long-term, because I have a fundamental degree that just says, at the very least, I can learn. I don't know.
Well, I think with anything, you have to be dynamic. So those individuals that dropped out of school in the 90s, okay, they were doing websites and now they're on to something else. I mean, how many times in a lifetime does someone reinvent themselves and change their careers?
Yeah.
Particularly in this international space. So I just think you just have to be dynamic. We know that having a job for 40 years working for, Ma Bell or AT&T, that is no longer the case. So you should always keep your skills dynamic. You should always be willing to learn, be coachable. I mean, look at me. I'm working at a university teaching English and business courses. Like, you wouldn't have told me I was doing that prior to moving to Mexico. But this is the opportunity that's afforded to me. And simply because I speak because I'm from the United States and I have this degree, so I have this opportunity in this other country that I probably wouldn't have gotten in the United States.
The other thing is, I think the universities are trying to figure it all out. There's a number of things at play, I believe. One is a lot of the jobs of the future, I read recently, haven't been defined yet, don't even exist at the moment. So there's that. The other one is the the millennials and the group after the millennials. I'm not sure what they're called yet. They're really driving the driving force with how education is shaping itself. They don't have the patience to tolerate 4 years of a university. So I believe we're starting to see universities introduce graduate certificates. I went online the other day and Harvard is offering graduate certificates for a number of different arenas, and it costs $11,000. Okay, so you get a graduate certificate, so you become proficient in this one area, and you can move on. So I'm thinking now universities need to figure out a way they're going to make money, but they also have to service this huge demographic that doesn't have the patience. I don't know how many of you are managers, but the millennials, for instance, they job hop almost every year or every 2 years. They don't stay within one job, let alone, commit to a university for so very long. So what is that going to look like in the future? These kids are on their phones, they don't have the patience. So I think a lot of that is still being determined as we speak. What do you guys think?
Yeah, a lot of that is the future is here. Things are moving faster now than ever possible before. And the question becomes, where do we go? Do we say that all of a sudden everyone should specialize? Because what I keep finding is that people, looks like Tiffany has joined the battlefield. Hello, Tiffany.
Hey, everybody. Hey. Sorry, I just came from dance class, so I'm a little not dressed in real clothes, but I'm here, so I'm gonna put in my charger and join. Yeah.
Listen, I had to mute my screen 1 second before people came in because I forgot I wasn't wearing any shirt or clothes at all. I was like, oh, wait a minute, click, and I had to come right back and go get something to put on. So you can wear your gym clothes. It's a step above where I was before I started on the show. So one of the things that we were just talking about was, are we going to specialize? There's a lot of my clients who are doctors and attorneys all say the same thing. They say, if you want to be good, specialize. The trick is, and could you mute Tiffany so we can, while you're setting up your, thank you. If you want to be good, specialize, but not a single one of them have ever said, hey, ignore the rest of it. Learn how to be a tooth doctor, but doesn't really understand the fundamentals of blood pressure, the fundamentals of how to stop an infection, things of that nature. And what I keep finding is, I feel like I'm swimming upstream by advocating for doing the hard work and bleed. It's almost as if my way of looking at it, and please stop me if anybody else disagrees or tell me if you've been through the same thing. I was going to school from 7 a.m. to about 2 in the afternoon. I was a cook in a restaurant from about 3 to 4 in the afternoon until about 10. And I was a bouncer from 10 until 2 in the morning. I did that for years, but I managed to put myself through school and it was hard and I was bleeding. I know that school is more expensive now, but has it become less important? Now, yeah, the field has been flooded with a lot of fake degrees and a lot of fake universities, but when you go to a place that actually is a school that's been around and you get a degree, I don't mean Harvard or Yale, I believe it's absolutely worth it over the long term because I didn't see, just like I was told by the older mentors, the men that helped me, past my father and my mother, but you don't know the benefit of an education until you're over 30 years old anyway. Because in your 20s, everybody can get a good job. People are willing to invest in youth and potential. But what if they need more? And I'll just throw that to the floor.
Maybe I can jump in here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I have a little bit of different take on education. I have a bachelor, master, and a PhD. And then, of course, I worked more than 10 years now. And I would say that what I took from all the education that I had was what was useful for me later on in my life was only how to think. To put it very concisely. Yes. Only that part, how to think. That's the only thing that I learned that was useful to me later on. Everything else was nearly useless.
But you're agreeing with me. If you took critical thinking and I say that with a capital C and a capital T, the concept of critical thinking that you learn through higher education is the reason you got so many degrees and why you and I can have this conversation half a world away from where we were born. Yes, I agree. If all you took away was critical thinking, the reason it's so valuable is because so few people have it or can learn it in the first place.
Yeah, and I think in future it's going to be much more important than specializations because of artificial intelligence. As artificial intelligence gets sophisticated and sophisticated, all the things that we have people to do now, in the past, machines replaced man muscle. Now I think with artificial intelligence, also human brain is going to be replaced by machines. So the only thing humans can contribute is the way of thinking, I think. And that's what future education is going to be about.
Brother Nathan is on the field. Nathan?
Hello, everyone. Sorry I'm late.
Can't see you.
Yeah, I know. I was saying my Hangouts are having a problem with the camera, so I'm going to try to maybe reset it and see what's going on. I'm not sure what the problem is.
Okay. Because, all right. Well, yeah, come back in, come back out.
Okay, there it is. There it is.
There you are.
Okay.
Lower the camera. I'm just looking at like your chin up.
Yeah.
There we go. There we go.
Okay.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Thanks for the invite.
I think, but I'm not sure, Esmar and I were just agreeing on the same thing. Because, Nathan, do you have something playing in your background?
Huh?
Is something playing in your background, Nathan?
No, not at all.
Okay, maybe with my imagination. Or maybe it's an echo. Does anyone else hear it? Yeah, it's your name.
Yes. Something's going on in the background there.
Okay. Hold on for 1 second.
You were great last time. I don't know what you changed in your configurations.
Yeah, it's just I'm going to restart my computer. I haven't restarted in a couple of days, and I'll try to log back in. Okay.
Okay, you got to get that gerbil on the wheel to run faster.
Okay, got it. Sorry about that.
What I was saying is I think Eswar and I may have actually disagreed on our point. When he said all he took away was thinking, I said, if that's all you took away, you got and that allows him to have the advantages he has. You don't go all the way through to a PhD without complete faith in the system, without complete faith that an education will get you more. Now, quick question though. Eswar, did you stay in the education field? Did you earn a PhD and then stay in education?
No. I left. I wanted to leave as soon as possible. The only reason that I did a PhD was actually because of the professor. He was into teaching how to think. That's what I saw in him. That's why I wanted to learn that from him, and therefore the means of doing that was to do a PhD.
Okay. All right. Now that I got that set. What? Oh, Roxana is. Oh, maybe she's busy doing something. I was wondering what happened to her. So when we looked at the 2 videos that I sent you guys, and I also posted them as a link on the bottom for anybody who wants to see it, the 2 biggest things that have been happening with education right now. Well, one of them, and I don't know how many of you got an opportunity to actually watch the videos, but right now, the SAT will assign a new score that factored where you were born, crime level in your neighborhood, essentially trying to give you a, how would I put it, a modifier if you came from a difficult situation. How do you know what? Normally I go first. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about someone going to take the SATs, which no exam is perfect, but the SATs we know are a flawed vehicle. We know that overall GPA, and this has been proven over and over again, overall GPA from your 4 years of high school is a far more accurate predictor of success than any standardized test that you simply take at the end of the year. But how do we feel about giving people kind of a modifier if you were in a high crime area?
Hi, everybody. From my understanding, the modifier will just go to the college and university. It's not an increase in score. It's an asterisk as to maybe why the student might be disadvantaged. So maybe they are in an area where they don't have SAT prep, or maybe the funding for SAT prep is not available based off of the data of the school. So from my understanding, again, this is like pretty new. So I obviously, people don't know me. My name is Tiffany. I am a school counselor for a high school that travels the globe. So it's a boarding school. But prior to that, I worked at a high achieving 100% Black and Hispanic high school in an urban area in the US. Despite it being Black and Hispanic, low income, 75% of students being the first in their family, we were actually the #1 high school in the state and the #2 in the number 20 in the country. So when you talk about breaking down barriers, I've seen it all. But we were a very unique school and unique situation. And prior to that, I worked in higher ed in their counseling center, and I taught in their undergrad and grad psych program. So when it comes to like testing, learning, assessment, this is kind of like my thing. So, and when it comes back to your question about the SAT, it's not an improvement in score. So it's not like an affirmative action scaffolding technique where students will gain a higher score based off of their information. They use the data that is registered for each high school. So depending on the number of students in the high school that are free or reduced lunch, will identify them as being a low income high school. Depending on like usually you'll hear the term like a Title I school. Maybe it's in a high crime area. So they'll take all those things into consideration and include an asterisk. So that way universities and colleges can kind of understand and identify maybe why this kid has a high GPA, but maybe a low SAT, ACT score. I'm sorry, not ACT, this is just a College Board thing. So just a low SAT score. So that, from my understanding, this is very new. Like the network I'm a part of, we're all trying to understand it and make sense of it. But for me, having worked in a high poverty area, I think it's fair. I think that we know that there are students who don't have access to lots of resources. And I think this is a way for there to be like an explanatory comma for university representatives to understand, because let's be honest, if you are applying to a school in a private university, maybe or maybe not, that admissions counselor understands the dynamics of the city that you're coming from. Most private universities are going to have applications come from all 50 states and other countries. There's no way they can understand the full data behind this school code that this application is coming from. And so a lot of times if they're just looking at it at black and white, we might be able to notice and see that, oh, this kid just is not really a great tester. And no matter what schools are saying that they're test optional, test flexible, these tests matter. And so we have seen so many students with lots of potential that we can include in our letters of recommendation. We can make advocacy calls. But at the end of the day, if they don't have access to how to take the SAT, they might be disadvantaged. And so
before we get far away from the mark, I'll say two things. I say this as I have a friend whose entire business model is he teaches and trains for the SAT and the ACT and the MCATs. That's what his company does. Most of his clients are extraordinarily wealthy people. I'll ask you this, could this backfire? What happens when a kid who ordinarily, maybe he's on the fence as far as whether or not the school accept him, and a phone call from you or a phone call from another professor really helps him, but then he gets that little asterisk next to his name that says, and he grew up in a high crime area. Does that not put the mark of, the mark of, oh, well, maybe we don't want one of those kids in school? Does that not flag him as more of a risk as opposed to less of a risk?
I don't think so. I mean, this is just my opinion and my own experiences. I would say that schools are heavily trying to diversify their profile. They're trying to include how many students are first in their family to go to college, because these things are reported. They're reported in these USA Today profiles. They're advertised on the websites. They want to be able to claim that they are giving back to those people who may not have had a choice. And whether it's selfish or unselfish, I mean, at the end of the day, the outcome means more students might be able to have an open door for this. But I have not seen, I mean, we have a lot of training as college counselors or university counselors on how to really explain certain things. So for example, if I have a student who grew up in a high poverty area, or who had maybe one parent in the household, or even a mental health disorder, we are trained how to articulate that in the letter recommendation as almost an explanatory comma. And we're trained on all sorts of things. If there's a downward spiral on the grades, but yet someone's grandmother died, or maybe this kid is watching 5 siblings at home. These are stories that universities care about, and they want to know. So I actually don't see it backfiring in that way. I can see it backfiring in many other ways, like maybe rural white kids benefiting from it. And maybe overlooking kids like our Black and brown students. But in the way that you're describing, I don't see that as a backfiring, because I think that universities are desperately trying to showcase diversity of many different forms, and being able to explain that they are doing things, especially after the last scandal. So in my personal and professional opinion, I don't think so, but I don't know what other people think. Obviously, this is brand new. I haven't even wrapped my own head around it. I'm just giving you like my first thoughts.
Does anybody else in education or that has a child want to jump in on whether or not they think that's a good thing or not?
I can say something.
Edward, one thing, while you're talking, I'm going to go fill this up. I'm not being a rude host. I'm listening.
Yeah, all right.
That doesn't mean don't talk. It means talk. I can still hear you.
Yeah, all right. As I said before, I'm from India, and this is something I think India was ahead of United States, for example, because in India in 1990s, the government introduced a system called reservation system to support lower caste people and women. You know, if you're aware of India, you probably heard of caste system in India, that people are divided into castes, and you have something called scheduled castes, the backward castes, and open competition. So people in scheduled castes and backward castes, they have been disadvantaged over centuries, and of course, women in all castes and classes have been disadvantaged. So they introduced a reservation system throughout, how should I put it, in everything, right from not schools, but universities to jobs. So all the universities and government jobs, there was, for example, for women, 33% reservation. So those seats, both in universities and jobs, can only be filled with women, and the same thing for castes and so on. And it is one of the systems that has been the least controversial in Indian history, in my opinion. Nobody questioned it, and it is highly accepted. And now it has been so successful that now there are strong arguments to actually delete the system, because these people have took advantage of this and grew so much that the system's validity, I mean, the reasons that were valid before are not valid anymore so much. So I think it, for example, in your case, the way I understood it, SATs, if you give some kind of reservation in SATs, they might actually backfire in university level. What they should do, I think, is also continue the reservation in university level and also federal jobs later. Something like that, I think, could work really well.
I didn't know that India had that system. I am familiar with the case system through friends. I know that it's a brutally oppressive system. And I didn't know that the government had been making such strides towards it. But did you actually say that they believe that maybe the gains have been made and that they may want to rescind that system?
Yeah, actually, it's funny now because anyone who tries to or remove the system, they can't do it, because the people from sections of the society which have been taking advantage of the system, they are not going to let it go. So they are not going to let anyone.
Are we having a language issue? Because when you say taking advantage of the system, what do you mean?
Yeah, well, taking advantage of the reservation system. For example, someone from a backward caste although now he doesn't really need it, or his kids doesn't need it, he wouldn't support removing the reservation system because it gives them an advantage.
It's similar to privilege and power in the US. I mean, we don't have a formalized system like a caste system, but we know that there are people, we have the 1%ers who maintain, like, I don't know the number, like 75% of the wealth. And they're never going to create policies and procedures for equality because that means that they lose. It's very similar to what happened in Cuba with Fidel Castro and trying to create this equalization of people. The biggest people who left Cuba were those who were most, I don't know, like they lost the most. And so I think what he's trying to say is, in the same way that we have white, you know, like white power, white privilege in the US, it's the same thing that happens there. Like the people who hold the keys to change are also the ones in power, and they know that changing the system, even though it's for the good, means jeopardizing them and their future generation and holding on to that power. I'm not sure if that's what you meant, but that's what I kind of got from it. But maybe I was trying to help clarify.
I said something actually the opposite of what you're saying.
Okay.
So let me do it a little slowly. So in 1990s, there was no reservation system. So everything is open competition. So in the open competition, the people who had a disadvantaged background, let's say like in United States, blacks or Hispanics or whatever, they couldn't compete with people from privileged sections because they had access to better resources. So the government introduced a reservation system where people from disadvantaged backgrounds got seats in universities, jobs later in life, etc., which were allocated only for them. So the people from privileged sections couldn't take them. They were reserved only for these people. Now, after 20, 30 years, a lot of people from these backward or disadvantaged sections of the society, they are much better off. Most of them, they don't actually need the reservation system anymore. But if anyone from the government proposes to remove the reservation system because the conditions that made it necessary 30 years ago are not there anymore, they wouldn't let it happen because it's like removing a joker card when you're playing cards. So they want to keep it.
So I have a question. Thank you for explaining that. Is there only a certain amount of seats, or if there's more than the allocation, if there's more qualified individuals than the allocation allows, could those seats be increased for that year, or is it just a amount of seats?
Yeah, I couldn't hear that because of the noise that just came in.
Sorry about that.
Well, that's interesting. We hear you clearly. There's something where I know what's happening. Your microphone is picking up your audio. Do you have a separate mic from your computer?
I did, but it's not plugged in.
Because that's what it sounds like. Anyone here can relate to what I'm saying? If you have a microphone next to a speaker and they're not aligned, your microphone will pick up what's coming out of your speaker. That's what we can hear.
Okay, let me try that. Hold on.
Now I apologize, Tiffany. Had you had a chance to fully go through what you wanted to say back to him, this question, because you got interrupted?
No, I think he didn't hear me. So I can repeat it again. No, I was just wondering, like, if there's, is there just a certain amount of allocated seats? And let's say one year there's more disadvantaged people who qualify for a particular opportunity. Are they willing to increase the amount of seats for that year? Or is it just like, no, we only have 20 seats available?
Yeah, it's limited. So for example, there are 100 seats. So let's say 33% are for women. So you have 67 seats remaining. Out of 67, let's say 10 seats are for scheduled castes, 20 are for backward castes, and the remaining will be for open competition. So I think, is it clear now?
Yeah, so let's say there are, you said there's 20 seats for women?
Let's say 33 for women, but there are, let's say, 50 women competing for it, for this 30 seats.
So there's 20 seats for women and there's 35 seats for men, but there are 50 applications from women. And after they fill the 20, the next 15 are better than the top, person of the male seats. Could they take those seats?
Of course, they can take it. So for example, so 20, if they are for women, they will be filled with women. And let's say there are 50 applicants, so there are 30 remaining women. So these 30 have to compete in open competition.
Well, my question is, how does the balance of power shift if we take away the allocations for women and underprivileged cases? Does the balance of power remain in a situation that will allow women and people who were born in disadvantaged cases to still progress? Or will the balance of power simply shift back to the way it was before those allocations were started?
For example, in India, this reservation was introduced also in politics. So the assembly seats, the parliament seats, also there we have reservations. So the balance of power definitely shifted in favor of disadvantaged people and women. There was no doubt about it.
So my question to you is this, based on a quote that I don't know who started it. The question I have for you is, does feeling the balance of power shift in their favor, is that simply the natural reaction when they say, how does the phrase go? To people who have had advantage, equality feels like oppression? I don't know if anybody's with me on that. Let me try to find out. Because it's been said by many, many people in many, many places, but no one can actually help me figure out exactly where it came from. No one has been able to, let's see. I'm going to share that with you. Have any of you seen that before? And
yeah,
so
I've heard it before. I haven't seen it, but I definitely heard it and have studied it a little bit before as well.
And so what I wonder is if we have a situation now, again, I am not Indian. I haven't been there. My experience with India has been through my friends from India and from the Indian subcontinent. It's if we're in a situation where suddenly someone has to compete with a person from a lower caste, but of equal education or integrity, it feels offensive. One of the issues that's happened in the United States is all of a sudden out of nowhere, you have a chunk of the white majority saying, and I say that because 80 to 85% of America is white, they would often present the argument that people are being given advantages over them, when in reality they said, well, my grandfather was one of many people who every generation got better. Why is my generation getting less? And look at all the advantage you give to other people. Well, in reality, his grandfather, first and foremost, never had to compete against women because women had no rights. He never had to compete against an immigrant, legal or otherwise, because immigrants had no rights. He never had to compete against a black person because black people, again, had no rights. So when thrown out into open competition and you have this ruthless capitalist market, when we have things like, correct me if I'm wrong, team, is it the O1 visa? Is it the O1 visa? Is our America's secret weapon?
H-1B, I thought it was. H-1B.
This is it. Individuals, with extraordinary ability or achievement. The O1 visa is America's secret weapon. Most Americans don't know that the majority of the Fortune 100 companies are headed by people not born in America. We're pulling in people that are 25 years old with a double PhD from China, 30 years old with a PhD in theoretical physics and a minor in something else from India. And so all of a sudden it feels like, where are these people coming from? Well, they're only competing in an open capitalist market that never really cared for race. It cared for who can make me the most money. And I don't know if anybody's with me on that, but that's how I've seen it.
Thank you for sharing that. I was not familiar or have heard of the O1 visa, but it makes sense.
Yeah, that O1 visa is America's secret weapon. When you look at Apple and all the major companies in the world, look at their top 10 executives and find out how many of them were. I personally, in my travels, have met people who cannot speak any English at all, but write a PhD level paper in English. I know men from India who learn physics with a piece of chalk, who never had a computer. They come to America, you give them a computer, and it's not even a competition anymore. They're just chewing everybody to pieces, and no one can understand why. So then it becomes they're being given advantages. No, your company just wants to hire somebody who can make them the most money. So now you have a lot of people, and I suspect the same thing may be true in India, whereas if you were from a caste where you never had to worry about competition from a lower caste, you never had to worry about competition from women, you never had to worry about competition from dark people, and India has the same dark issue that America does. It broke my heart because I fell in love in side story time. I love Bollywood. Anybody else love Bollywood? I love Bollywood. It broke my heart when I started to really look up my favorite actors and look at stuff they did on YouTube and then see them doing commercials for skin lightening cream. And it broke me, because I love these guys. And little things like that. So that's how I see it. I think that the competition may simply be equalizing, and now you have to work as hard as a woman did, or as hard as a lowercase person did, or as hard as a brown person did.
Yeah, but I was saying, for example, 1996 was when I got into bachelor. So I was pretty much around the same time when this reservation system was introduced in India. And we never had a problem with it for some reason. Because this has been going on, this oppression of women and other castes, lower and scheduled castes. It has been going on. Sorry?
I want to make sure that I heard you correctly. Can you please repeat your opening statement that as of 1996, we never had that problem?
No. We didn't have a problem to accept the reservation system.
So when was the reservation system enacted?
Yeah, in 90s. I don't know the exact year, but around that time it was enacted.
Let's say it started around 1990?
Yeah, let's say.
And in 1996, what happened?
That's when I got into a bachelor degree. So that's when I was faced with the reservation system, having to, these people have these many seats. Not everything is open competition anymore. Some people have special reservations, etc. So I was faced with that, and I grew up in that system later. And I have to say that it is one of the systems that was least controversial. Nobody cushioned it.
So let me be clear before and anyone else feel free to jump in. Some of you may know where I'm going with this. Do you propose that between the year 1990 at earliest and 1996, when you went into your bachelor's degree program, that all the problems that system was intended to address must have already been solved? That in 6 years?
You're misunderstanding. Let me.
I want to make sure.
That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying, forget about years. What I'm saying is, in my experience, the reservation system in India for women and the backward caste, etc., is one of the least controversial systems. Okay. Nobody questions its importance or that it should be there or it shouldn't be there. Nobody questions it. It is accepted and it is practiced.
Okay. Well, then I'm glad that I got clarity on that to make absolutely sure what I was saying, because I know what it sounded like. Did anybody else take it the wrong way? I'm glad that I changed that. So that's neither here nor there. Going to the second video that we had that I asked everybody to look at, even though not everybody could, about how Yale wasn't surprised that their school was central in the college admissions scandal. Who knows what the college admissions scandal was? Alinda, open it for him. Tell him what it was.
Well, it's just this, it's, you know, a discovery, I guess you could say, a revelation. I don't recall how it came to be publicized, but that certain people who are well off and probably already in a position to gain admission to a preferential admission to certain universities were involved in a bribery scheme to allow their children to be admitted.
What I love is how complex it was.
Mm-hmm.
They had a situation where, example, let's say there's a university rowing team for boats. They would go to the coach and say, you've got 10 scholarships. I want you to give 5 of them to these kids. We're going to slide you some cash. These kids would then be retrofitted as having been rowers, applying for a rowing scholarship, having never touched a boat in their life. The students in the rowing program don't even know these kids exist. All they know is there are only 5 of them, but they didn't know there were 10 slots to begin with. So you have kids taking up scholarship spots. Not only are they bribing people, they're taking up scholarship spots from kids who had to work their ass off to go to college because they couldn't afford to pay the tuition. It is hilarious to look at the disproportionate punishment when we have in the United States women who lied and fathers who lied about their children's address to go to a better school who are going to prison, whereas the people who were found red-handed guilty of bribery, not so much. And it broke my mind because the Yale students went through something. I had a privilege working with money. One of the reasons I was able to semi-retire early wasn't because I was rich. I just understood how money worked. And I had a lot of very, very wealthy clients who taught me a lot of principles that helped me to find financial security and freedom. But one of the things that these Yale students talked about when the interview happened, and I hope you guys get to look at that YouTube video, is a lot of them came from what was middle-class upbringing, and they said they had no idea what wealth and power was until some of their classmates every now and then would accidentally allow them to see what wealth and power was. What it's really like to have a family with enough money to say, I simply don't want the rules to apply to my child. And they didn't. I went to school with a young woman who was sweet as peaches, but her father, this is a true story, often bragged about how when she sent in her university application, he stapled a check for 4 years tuition to the corner. The check had been cashed before his daughter got the acceptance letter. Anybody else ever see something like that happen?
Absolutely. That's why I'm here. I'm more interested in the debt part of the education conversation and how the effect of money and the role that it plays and whether or not an education is really necessary, because there is a difference between having a degree and having a network and knowledge. And there are people who come from a privileged or financially or otherwise background who have an advantage where in their situation, an education or a degree, because there's a difference, is not always necessary. I think for the majority, though, we do have to agree that an education and a degree are necessary. And so tying into that, because my background is in law, going through law school, I had the, I don't want to call it unfortunate, experience of learning about the difference that certain students have based on their financial background. And I was actually approached by one of my professors, an African-American professor, who gave me some insight as to how, although our grading system was supposedly anonymous, how some students are able to get around the anonymity of grading. And it's an unfortunate reality. I don't think that's going to...
Give me 2 examples. How do they get around the anonymity of grading?
Yeah. Oh, you're going to get me in trouble.
Drop any name, but right. The family, it's okay.
All right. Okay. Well, our if you know, you know. Well, now I know, and I'll share the nugget. But and I'm in my particular school.
You said you're a lawyer, right, Alinda? You said you're a lawyer, yeah.
Right.
So you know which language to use without getting into trouble.
Right. Well, I mean, it is what it is. I don't have a problem speaking about it, but I don't know how far this video will go. I don't want any phone calls tomorrow, but we'll see. And so our Well, there's two elements to grading. We were on a bell curve, which meant a certain number of students were going to be at the higher end of the curve, a certain number of students at the lower end of the curve, and the majority in the middle. And so students that were already at the higher end of the curve were not going to be graded in the middle because it would hurt their average. And so students knew, those who knew that coming in within their first semester would establish themselves at the higher end of the curve, and then it helps to carry them throughout law school. And then to get around the anonymity of grading was, unfortunately, it's visiting the professor. And so some students would get into a habit of visiting the professor outside of class and say, this is what I'm working on. I'm trying to work through this question or this issue. Can you read my material? And they would develop key words or key language that the professor could use to identify that student. Well, they're using this word very frequently. And so when they saw that exam, they would have an idea that this is the student that provided this, because that student had been in their office so often that they were able to grade according to how they felt that student should be graded, as opposed to perhaps how they really performed on the exam.
That's a beautiful system. One of the things that I was growing up, because my parents made sure I could read 3 grade levels ahead my entire life, and that gave me an enormous advantage in high school and college. But one of the things that I learned, I often tell people that I scored well on tests, but it had nothing to do with whether or not I was smart. Now, I don't know if kids can get away with these days because the world is different and technology generates tests different. I grew up with teachers typing out their tests, copying them and giving them to you. But if you understand how to read, and again, what is my profession today? Editor, copy editor, proofwriter, proofreader. I could read an exam and tell you what the correct answer was because I understood how teachers wrote or how that teacher wrote.
That's different from
totally different
from using keywords to identify to the professor that this is me. I've been in your office all year and I deserve a better grade. To me, that's different. I mean, from based on what you're saying, you were graded according to your performance because you learned the skills necessary to take the exam, not necessarily the skills necessary to beat the exam.
Now, I have a question though, Linda, and this is more towards who we are as people. With you, it was using the law to understand the way the world really works, if I can use that. And this is open to everyone to jump in. For me, it was working in the financial business for enough years to really see how money worked in the real world. It poisoned me in a way that I became immune to believing that the world was ever a fair and nice place. And I learned that I could legally use so many advantages to put myself in a position to not be in debt and to actually come out on the plus side financially. And I had about a brief moment, maybe a few months of my life, where I thought, this is terrible. How come everyone can't do this? And then I realized the world isn't a nice or a fair place. With the information that you have you looked at it and said, you know what, I'm just going to take this information and make sure that the people in my circle benefit from it and understand that not everybody's going to make it? Or is it something that you look at saying, I'm going to stop this system?
Well, I think you have to be careful because those, we talk about the powers that be, but people that are in a privileged position are also in a position to eliminate widespread information. So I won't, I do have a concern for people in my circle, but at the same time, without people having gone through the process that I went to think at the level that I think, they're not able to fully receive all of the information that I give them. I mean, even within my circle, there are people who went to law school but didn't maybe learn to process information the way I learned to process it, or read it, because I'm an avid reader. And so sometimes I'm able to find a nugget here or useful information there on things that can benefit me in the future without having a full understanding of the system. It's hard for people to receive that on a wide scale. But
you and I are going to have a one-on-one chat, and we might make it public for other people to gain from our wisdom. But I would love to compare notes on some of the things that you saw on how, quote unquote, the system works, and that I saw from a financial aspect to really understand how power inflates itself, but maybe also how regular people, I say I'm just a regular dude that understands how to hustle, can benefit from it as well.
Absolutely. I think it's useful. I'd like to put something out there for the masses, or for at least those of us who are in a similar position, people who, are expats or looking for a different form of education. It's definitely useful, but it's hard to find people who are able to receive it.
Yeah, and that's the painful part. That's the painful part when you try to give them a goodie. But it's interesting when you talk about how even within the university system, they make effect that the teachers already know this is the child of this person, this is the son of that person, because they can make it very acutely aware even through the higher ups. I know people who've had a dad or an uncle call someone in the school and said, hey, make sure my kid gets this, make sure my kid gets that, because I'm going to donate this much money to your school. And that's how, and when they graduate, there's never any real question as to where they're going to go. But the question now becomes is, where do we break the wheel, as they would say? Nerd out session, as Danny would say in Game of Thrones, Daenerys says, how do we break the wheel? Or is the wheel going to turn and we can simply choose whether or not to ride that wheel? And that's for everybody. Wow, this is the first time I've had that.
I have a couple of
I never watched Game of Thrones, so sorry.
Yeah, neither have I. So
Me neither.
I have a few thoughts. So my youngest daughter is, she has a 4.0 GPA. She's a rebel. She's all tattooed up, as the 20-year-olds are. And she sat out about 4 years after high school. She did not want, she rebelled of going to pursue her higher education degree. But finally, she realized that in order to compete, she had to go to school and get a degree. So now she's got a 4.0 and she has universities approaching her. She has zero debt. She has, everything's been, scholarships. So my point is, what are her options to stay out of debt? She's got to keep trying to get a full ride, right? And so my point is, if she doesn't get the full ride, we really don't want to get caught up in this, student debt thing. My sister, I think, she has her PhD from Virginia Tech. She and you guys know I don't have a degree. I don't have a university degree. So the question is, how much? My sister, I think she incurred almost $80,000 in debt, or $60,000, something like that. So at what point does pursuing the degree become so important that people of color get into massive amounts of debt?
Well, I want to say one quick thing first before I throw it to the floor. The majority of debt that people really get into is, of course, school debt, but we often underestimate the significant number of people who accrue debt but don't finish the degree. I have had so many people in my financial professional years, I had so many people sitting across my desk, and I can't figure out what's wrong with their financial situation. But if you take out those student loans and don't finish your degree, you are 100% screwed. 100% the odds of you ever having anything, because remember, you can default on a lot of things, but you can't default on the government under no circumstance. So she's got to finish it. Go ahead, Tiffany.
Yeah, I think not necessarily for your daughter, but for the next generation, and those that are in school now. I know one thing that I do with my kids all of junior year, and we have family meetings, is not just looking at schools that are a really good academic fit and a good social fit, but I think we really need to make sure that there's a good financial fit. So when I worked at a private university in Connecticut, actually, I grew up in the same town as Yale, which is a very poor town, which is actually the same town where the African-American woman used a different zip code to get her kid in school. So all of this sits really close at home to me. But in terms of like my role, one of my commitments as a counselor for high school kids is to make sure that they understand the financial component, especially in the US. And I'm going to talk a little bit about global academics as well, but I'll stay on this for this particular question. But I know when I worked at the private institution, you would see so many kids who knew they couldn't afford it from day one. And this is not back, like when I was in school, like the most expensive year for everything was like $15,000. And now that school it's a state school where I went to undergrad. My state school is now almost $40,000, even if you're in state, meaning you're tax paying family. The Pell Grant has not gone up for Black and Brown students at like usually use it significantly. So the Pell Grant has always been $5,500. And so what's happening is the tuition is going up, but the means that the government used to use to support low-income families has not. And so when kids would come in, especially Black and brown kids, I was like the only Black individual at the university in that department. So they would always flock to me and I would always come in. I'm like, listen, what is the financial situation? The school that I worked at was significantly expensive. At the time when I was working there, it was around $63,000. So it was not a cheap university to attend. And I knew you can see the tears in these kids' eyes. I really want to go here. And families need to start doing a little bit better with saying no. And that's something that was really hard for my kids when I was working in New Haven at that high school was, this is the first time your family might not be able to make it happen. You want Jordans, you want an Xbox, you want this, you want that. Like they might be able to like scurry up $300, $500, $1,000 from grandma, auntie, uncle, godmommy, goddaddy, whomever. But we're talking about thousands of dollars, double, triple the amount of their salary. And they might not be able to do it. So the first key is understanding how to read the financial aid report is a really big skill that families need. Because one thing you have to understand is usually schools, when they advertise their costs, they're advertising what is known as direct costs. They're not advertising cost of attendance, which means that the indirect costs are also important for success in college. So what is the indirect cost? Like for two things, very important. Transportation. Can your family afford to even get you to this institution? Do you understand that there are 3 times throughout the year that you have to vacate campus? You cannot stay, which means you need to be able to go back home. Number 2, can you afford books? The number one reason why students fail out of college is not because they're in their room playing video games. It's not because they're partying. It's because they actually don't have textbooks. They understand like, oh, you don't need to buy them. You can share it. They decide not to own one. And it has shown through data that students who don't own a textbook are more likely to be on academic probation. The other issue is when you owe a school money. So let's say you make it happen your freshman year, your parents, if they have good credit, are able to co-sign a loan. Now you're in. But now that credit is basically screwed. The second year when you need it, you're not able to get that loan co-signed. So now you are in a position where you show up on August 15th to move in to get a key to your dorm and you're on a blacklist. You're like the resident director is going to let you know. Because when I was in grad school, I was a resident director and I used to have to tell students, you have to go to the bursar's office. Like I cannot give you a key. You cannot register for classes. You cannot step foot on this campus. And when I was at Howard for grad school, we actually kind of like evicted kids. We gave them until like the 3rd week. And when they didn't, like when they came back to the dorm, like all of their stuff was like ready to go. And they needed to figure out a way to get back to God knows where, California, Florida, Ohio, all these different places. So then what happens is now it's a domino effect. Universities and financial aid systems all use one software for student data called iPads. And so what happens is, let's say I'm the student who owes the university money. So now I owe this university money. And what happens is I am like blacklisted. So now even if I want to go to another school, I can be unethical and say I'm a first year freshman, which if they find that out, you're going to be kicked out within 24 hours. But if I say I'm going as a transfer student, what is the thing you need? You need your transcript. And so you can't get anything from this other university because you owe money. You can't get a transcript. You can barely get a phone call into any office on campus unless it's to make a payment. And so now you have this domino effect. So not only is this kid in debt, this kid has debt that requires probably a college degree, maybe with a higher salary job to be able to pay off that debt. But they can't actually go back to school until they pay the first school off. And so I think part of it, and I used to advocate for this, and I still am like really gung-ho on this with the counselors from the university side that I have built relationships with. Number one, counselors and families need to do better with financial planning on, not in terms of saving for money. I don't think anyone can really save for college anymore in the US. It's almost unrealistic to be able to say you're going to put aside $500,000 to $200,000 per kid, because really that's the cost that families are paying out of their pocket. But I think counselors need to be a little bit better with their students and say, no, you can't afford this school. There's no reason for you to put all this sweat equity into applying to the school. The data is there. They tell you what is the term is called percentage of need met. So every school will tell you how much they're actually willing to give. And so if you find a school that's 100% need met and you need 100%, they'll give it to you. If you find a school that's 80% need met and you need 100%, they'll give you 80. But what happens is it's like a balance. So if your family can afford, based off of the kind of the expected family contribution, $20,000, they'll take $20,000 off of that price. So let's say the price is $50,000. They'll take $20,000 off what your family can give. Your balance is $30,000. And if a school is 80% need met, they'll give you 80% of that $30,000. So that is how the financial aid system works. Counselors need to do better at that. I know that that's not possible. I know that the numbers at most schools are like 300 kids to one counselor, but whatever needs to happen, like families need to get educated, like something needs to go on. And then number two, it is very unethical, in my opinion. And I used to tell this to the counselors at the school.
Real quick, let's let Roxana get a quick question in or a statement. I just want to see where she wanted to go.
Can I jump in here? Can I jump in here? Can I jump in here?
Go ahead. I mean, we'll go back to Tiffany in a second. I just want to.
Hello? Where's my? I can't hear you.
I can hear you. It's okay.
I can hear her too.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Tiffany, God bless you. God bless you. God bless you. God bless you. I love all the knowledge that she just gave us. And because of that, this is another reason why I'm not in the United States with my daughter. I hope and I pray that she chooses to go to school either here in Mexico, another country in Latin America, maybe Cuba, or like my cousin's daughter, she's going to a really good school in Canada. Her girlfriend these are my cousins in Maryland. Her girlfriend that she's in school with is also from Maryland. My whole point is the United States and that scam, that matrix is not an option for my child. And I think for a lot of other immigrants or expats who are living abroad, because what Tiffany just described is what a lot of us have gone through. And I'm exhausted from what she said. I'm tired. Like Obama and his wife just recently finished paying their student loans while they were in office. So, and also with Lisa, her daughter fortunately has scholarships. And yes, I would love for my daughter to have scholarships. Obviously, she'll be an adult. She can choose to go to school in the United States. Maryland has a 2-year program now that the governor just signed where you can go to community college for free in Maryland, where she was born, where her dad lives. My point is, more and more people are realizing the scam that is higher education in the United States, and they're looking at alternatives. They're looking at educating their children outside of the United States. I'm one of those parents. I have a girlfriend, her daughter is attending medical school in Cuba right now for free. She's in medical school in Cuba for free. She herself is in medical school in Antigua. My point is, people are realizing the scam that's the American educational system, higher educational system, and they're looking for they're seeking education elsewhere actively.
And can I jump in before Tiffany joined us, I mentioned that, and Tiffany, you're probably aware of this, that there are many of the private institutions that are offering graduate certificates. So I was looking, just cruising the internet, and I went to Harvard because I'm trying to help. I'm just looking around, poking around to help my daughter figure out where she wants to go. So Harvard's offering these, these certificates for $11,000. You get a certificate in, they're calling them certificates, and so I'm wondering what's up with these certificates. Is this some sort of new product that universities are putting out there on the marketplace for the millennials and the group after them who don't have the concentration or the patience or the money to go through a 4-year or to pay all that money? I mean, what do you know about these graduate certificates, and what's that about?
Yeah, so certificates have been around for a long time, even when I was working in higher ed, and I've been out of higher ed now for, what year are we in? For about 5-6 years, but they have been around for a long time. So what they are, they're usually not something that students would get on their own. So it's not something that students will normally apply to and will like just get a certificate just to have. Usually you'll find individuals in the workforce whose jobs are encouraging them. So most times you'll see these certificates offered in industries or in locations where they are popular. So for example, like in Connecticut, you have United Technologies Corporation, which is like Sikorsky Aircraft, you have Otis Elevator. So you have all of these companies that hire engineers. And so most of UTC has a tuition, like they have a tuition remission program for their employees. And so employees don't necessarily need another MBA or they don't need another degree, but if they want to specialize in something. So it's almost like a paper version of a minor.
Right. Okay.
And so the certificates usually have.
I'm sorry if I took this off topic.
Let me show you guys something real quick where I went to get my second degree, my bachelor's degree, just to give you a reference point. Take a look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That says in-state tuition, $6,600. In-state books and supplies, $1,200. Living costs, $13. Okay. Out of state, it's $21 for tuition. Now, the reason I'm showing this is because what a lot of people don't know, and this piggybacks on something Tiffany said about what are we going to do. When I finished my first degree, my associate's degree, and I went looking for another university, I went there and I talked to the people. They had my grades and everything. And I said, I want to go to this university. They said, okay, great. This is what it's going to cost you. I said, hold on, slow down. I'm more than happy to go to this university, but I want in-state tuition. And they said, well, that's not possible. You're not in the state. I said, well, listen, clearly I'm smart enough to go to a school that I want to go to. I want to go to one that I can afford, but I want in-state tuition. And this is something, Eswar, as a negotiator, you understand where I'm going with this. And I said to them, listen, you can have somebody on your roll that's willing to pay, can make the payments, can add to your GPA. Give me in-state tuition. I'll stay here for the summer. Give me a couple of months. And they just caved. They said, sure. Some money that we know is coming is better than blah, 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 blah. These things are possible, but a lot of people don't know that. One of the things that I learned working with money very, very young, and I'm always going to go back to that those formative years working in the financial industry, is everything is negotiable. Everyone and everything has a price, no matter how much we like to believe otherwise. The only people who pay full price for anything are people at the bottom of the socioeconomic spectrum. Everyone else will go in and negotiate hard. So I don't know, everybody else has been talking about the cost of their universities. I managed to get out almost, and that's this year, by the way. Tuition goes up. I paid less.
Congratulations.
Let me ask you guys, for example, I did my master and PhD in Europe, in Germany. Why, and it was completely free of cost, and I was actually earning money during I did my master and PhD. I mean, PhD, I was being paid both by the university and the industry, and also during masters, I was working, so I was getting money, and there was no tuition fee. So net, I was making money. I mean, why can't you do it from United States? Go to Europe and study there.
Yeah, actually, I have some data points for you guys too. And this is just something. So my role at this school, we have kids from all over the world. So by nature, I just have to learn the different university systems and structures across the world. And so I know I wasn't on the Google Hangouts piece in the beginning, but I was listening to the conversation on my way here. So I did hear a little bit of the beginning, but one thing I do think is true is I think we have to recognize this is not an higher education problem globally. This is just in the United States. Higher education was created by white males to give themselves a gap year to kind of explore things. They didn't really need a degree. They were just going to school to grow up, and then they would work at their families' corporate companies. So when college was created, it was supposed to be this opportunity for learning. Unfortunately, the narrative that we hear now, especially in the US, is that people just go to college just for a job. When in reality, they should be going to college to do the one thing that Yusef talked about a little bit earlier, which is learning how to critically think. because that's what you're going to get through the classroom spaces there. But I just want to give you some data. So like my friend, I don't know his name. Why does it say negotiate? Okay, let me see. What's your name? Who's from India?
Eswar.
Yeah, Yusuf says it wrong. Ishwar.
Ishwar.
You never told me that.
Ishwar. Okay.
I lost hope on you. I gave up on you.
Told me that.
He lost hope on you. It's yeah. I mean, there's something empowering about saying someone's name right. So thank you for correcting me. Eshwar. Yeah. Eshwar. Okay. Like he mentioned, so when you look at most systems in place, if you go to school in your home country, and I'm looking at about 15 countries that I was able to think of on the top of my head, the cost of attendance to go there is between $0 and $10,000. And so the 10,000 you'll find in the UK. So the UK is probably, when you think about like degrees that are like similar to like the US, I mean, all these degrees are reputable and all these degrees are transferable across many country lines. But the UK, when you look at Cambridge and Oxford, which is actually a better university than what we would consider like the Yale and Harvard. So usually it's Cambridge, Oxford, and then it's Harvard. Actually, people globally don't even really know a lot about Yale, which was like really surprising for me, but Harvard they know. And so Cambridge and Oxford, with all of its prestige, is $10,200 per year to go. It has not gone up at all. And when it was going to go up for about like $150, the kids protested like none other, and they stopped it. And most of the rest of the places, you'll find the tuition fees for people who have this like country, like they pay tax to the country, is between $0 and around $6,000 when you're out of the UK. Scotland is completely free. Germany is completely free. Norway, Finland, Denmark, Sweden, like those Scandinavian countries, completely free. And they're also, some of these countries are also completely free for people from other countries. Now, you have to have really good counseling and backwards planning to know the requirements, but most of the requirements are like 3 AP classes. So if you do really good guidance with students early on, like 9th grade, 10th grade year, and you want to save money, you can just kind of have kids put on a track, and kids don't have to sit in an AP class. So I know sometimes we say, well, what if my school doesn't have an AP class? If they're in a rigorous study cycle on their own, they can actually self-study for AP exams. 100% of my students, we don't have AP classes, self-study for exams, and perform really, really well on them. So you just have to kind of do some backwards planning. The great thing that I like about schools, especially in Europe, you're thinking like Romania, which is like one of the biggest IT places in Bucharest. You have Germany, you have Sweden, you have the Netherlands, you have the UK. One thing that I always ask about these countries, Ireland as well, when I go and do visits or I'm at these conferences, I say, what is the pathway to working? And one thing that's really awesome about these places, and maybe our friends could tell us based off his experience in Germany, is usually after you get a degree, they usually give you what is known as a 6 to 18 month like job seeking visa. So now, as long as you can support yourself, you have the ability to search for a job. And so then after that, Anderson.
I apologize. Anderson.
Maybe you should just mute him.
And I hate doing that to people, but it's like I have to.
Yeah, we don't care. We don't even realize we're not on mute. I just forget. I don't even realize because I can't hear any noise. It sounds really quiet. But what I was going to say is not only do they give you a grace period to find a job, but usually within 2 months, 2 to 3 years of actually having that job, you are now a permanent resident. And so when you're thinking about students, going to countries, which is why I don't recommend a lot of students from outside of the US to go into the US. I say, listen, you're going to have a degree, you're going to have to go back home. We don't have a pathway program, but there's so many countries out there that do. And so I think that they're like,
hold on, Tiffany, I got to give you a little pushback from a different direction. What you're saying, may be true from an educational standpoint. I've lived in enough countries, just as some of the people here, it's not all about the education when they come to the United States. Often that trade-off of not getting a higher education later in life, for many of them, is worth just getting into the United States by any means necessary now. Because one of the things that I've learned, I'll give you a great example of where I live in Brazil. And Alinda, I'd love to hear your opinion on this, and Anderson, your opinion on this. Most of my Brazilian friends don't want to leave Brazil because they do come from that group of people who can get an education here and do well anyway. The people who are going into the United States, they're not going based on, wow, if I can get there, I or my children can get a better higher education. They're going for a completely different set of reasons. You know?
Yeah, that might be true. However, I think it's important for us to understand the reality of the political platform that's going on in the U.S. It has not been.
Can I add something there to what just Yusef said? Just a little. I think, for example, I have the same situation here at home. Who wants to go to United States? For me, it's ignorance, not knowing what's on the other side of the pond. It really comes down to that, because I know people who lived in Europe, my classmates, and then have been living in United States, and they really hate it in United States. Let me put it like this. I mean, during my master's and PhD, the cream of the crop stayed in Europe. All the garbage went to United States.
And again,
I think
I don't disagree with that. What I'm saying,
I think
people are coming
back to. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Tiffany.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I didn't hear you talking. What is it? No, I think it goes back to, like, we're not talking about the exception, right? We're talking about re-educating people and families and how they're advising people to get through this higher ed kind of hump that we're starting to see. And I think we can talk about, yeah, people want to go to the US, but at the end of the day, number one, I think a really high number of immigrants, like the number one percentage of immigrants are not people who got there illegally, not people who swam, not people who are going to necessarily climb this damn wall that they're trying to build. It's people who went there on student visas, or work visas that have expired. And the reason we have so many educated people in the US who have PhDs that got them in the US, master's degrees, engineering, all these STEM things I heard you talking about earlier, Yusef, they have degrees, they're not able to get a job because they don't have an opportunity to work in the US. Companies will not sponsor them because they have to vet out every single person in the country before they can hire someone to sponsor them. And yeah, I know you brought up that visa, but that is far and few between.
Go back. They have to vet out every person in the country. I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying. When you said vet.
Yes, so vet out, they have to make sure that they are recruiting first off nationals. So there's no pathway right now for people who have degrees to get a job in the US. They don't have they're not earning a visa. So usually what happens is after your student visa expires, you're supposed to leave. Then after that, you are now considered an illegal immigrant inside the United States. And so then when you're applying for jobs, sometimes you might be able to get away with it. But these higher level jobs that have really good screenings, once they ask you for your social security number and your, that you do get when you do go as a student visa, you're no longer able to have it. So I think if we're not talking about the exception of all these people who have this dreamy idea of the United States. Like, I think like our friend just said, a lot of people are starting to realize it is not what we thought it was, like even when I moved abroad, people are always telling me like, are you sure you're ready to give up living here in the US? I'm like, what did the US give me? Except for unnecessary debt, lack of healthcare. And I had really good jobs. And I mean, I still spent so much money on healthcare. When you go to these other countries as students, like he said, you have free healthcare. You get to work 20 hours a week. a lot of times international students in the US, number one, they have to be full paying. They don't have access to grants because they're not a US citizen, so they can't get a loan. They don't necessarily get health insurance for free. They have to pay for it. They usually can't work on campus. So we're talking about not what is the exception of these people that want to come to you. We're just saying, let's educate people on the reality is when you go to the US, this is what you're going to get. If you choose to go somewhere else, you're going to have a better experience. Probably at the end of your actually, I had more data. So most schools in the world, their bachelor's degrees are 3 years. Number two, usually if you know that you want to go to med school or you want to go to law school, usually those programs are 5 to 6 year bundles at the same rate of tuition as your original cost of your bachelor's degree. So we're not talking about now you finish college, now you need to reapply, and now you need to like spend extra money, right? Because we know professional schools give nothing. If you go a research route, like it looks like some of people did in this chat, like I had an assistantship. You can do an assistantship which might pay for your school. But if you do law school, vet school, medical school, those MBA, engineering, those schools usually don't come with financial aid. So usually I always advise students, if you're going to get an MBA, or you're going to get a master's in engineering, get a job. Most jobs have partnerships where they will pay for your degree. But if you're going to go to like med school, law school, vet school, those things are going to cost you. Versus if you go out of the US, they have English programs. You can get in through the AP route, which is usually around 3 to 4 APs. 4 is Germany, because Germany is the most strict. And now you actually have an opportunity, especially if a kid knows what they want to do. If they don't know what they want to do, I can advise them to go to the Netherlands. The Netherlands has a very similar setup for certain places. Ireland has a very similar setup of certain places where you can actually change your major and explore. But if a kid knows they want to be a doctor, there's no reason for them to spend 4 years in undergrad, 4 years in grad school. No, in Ireland, you are a doctor in 6 years. In Germany and the UK, you actually can apply to these schools from high school and you are a full-fledged doctor at most. Like I said, the UK is usually the most you're going to spend at $50,000, $60,000 total. If you have financial aid, but even if you don't, that's 1 year's worth of tuition back in the US. So I think I need to actually go because it's getting late and I need to head out. But I just wanted to like impart that information regarding like looking at kids across the globe are still getting degrees because it doesn't come with the financial hardship and the pity that comes with debt. So I think it's important for us to realize that degrees and education is not bad. It's the fact that we have capitalized it in the United States that has caused such like a misery to be attached to it. But if you look at the rest of the globe, if you're a New Zealand citizen and you live in New Zealand, you're going to go to school for free. Same thing in Australia, same thing in Canada. There's so many schools. It is only in the US, even our cheapest option, which is community college, is still cheaper than going to school in Scotland, which has like University of Edinburgh, which is like one of the best schools in the world. So all I'm trying to say is we have to get out of the fact that like degrees are bad. The degree is not what matters because most of us are probably not even working in what we went to school for. But the ability to network, like I think I heard someone say like their daughter might do something online, not sure how they can network, but if they are able to network, if they're able to critically think, if they're able to do teamwork, things that you're able to practice in a university setting, those things are still happening across the globe. Let us not think that because we have this tunnel vision of what our experience was in the US, that that's actually being permeated throughout the globe. It's not. Kids are still excited about going to school because it doesn't come with sorrow. And so I think it's just important for us to see that. But
Tiffany took us to church. Tiffany took us to church. God bless you, sister. God bless you.
Amen. They want to go to school because school does not come.
She got me shaking. She got me shaking.
Tiffany, I want to put your Instagram link in the comments because I want everybody to be able to find you again. As always, the door is always open for you. I love having you with us. I hope you have a good night.
Hi, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
There was a brief few minutes earlier where Tiffany was like, oh, I don't know if I'll be able to jump in. I knew she couldn't resist it. I knew she was coming. She always shows up.
I love me some her. I love me some her.
Yeah, she's
Yep.
awesome. She's on the ground.
That's the path. that's the path that we are on for my daughter. That's the path that we are on for my daughter. We're looking at Germany. We're looking at Canada. We're looking at right here in the in Mexico. We're looking at Cuba. We do not want her to go to school in the United States for her higher education. That is just something that we're not interested in for her because of the debt, And there's just so many more opportunities outside of the United States for a reasonable cost.
Linda, I saw you had a little co-host with you. Who was that?
Oh, that's my little person.
So when you came here, well, how old was she? Was she born here, and what's her education?
She was born in the United States. The first time she came to Brazil, she was 2. And she's, how old are you? 4. She's 4 now. So she's been in Brazil learning Portuguese and English pretty simultaneously. I just wanted to sort of summarize what Tiffany said, and to answer Lisa's question directly, I 100% agree with everything she said. For someone that's looking into going into higher education from the United States, there are 3 main approaches I always recommend, because I get people asking me, should I go to law school? And with the amount of debt that you would acquire going to law school, I advise people, do not go to law school just to learn how to think. Don't go to law school just to think it's going to open options for you. Unless you want to go into litigation and be a lawyer, you do not need to go to law school and take on that kind of debt. The 3 things that I recommend are, number 1, trying to get as much college credit as possible before even going into college. There's so many dual enrollment options for students who are in the United States that you can pretty much get 2 to 3 years of college credit before going into the university, and then only having to take on the cost of the university for 1 year.
When you say college credit before university, are you talking, for example, I did something like Upward Bound, math and science program. They gave me a little bit of college credit ahead of time. Are you talking about programs like that while you're still in high school?
Like that, Upward Bound, those types of programs, but they also have AP credits, which allows you to take an exam to show that you're proficient at a certain level in a certain subject, and then you're exempt from taking those courses, or you actually get the credit. They will give you credit. There's also a program, I'm not sure if it's still called the CLEP. When I was in school, that's what it was, but you can take an exam to say, like, I've mastered this level of mathematics and this level of composition or whatever, and then you're actually given credit for those courses so that you don't have to take those courses. There's also dual enrollment. I'm originally from Florida. In Florida, you're able, in fact, it's part of the public education that while you're in high school, your 11th and 12th grade year, the credits that you are taking that qualify you for graduation from high school also are dually counted as credit for college. So you can take college level chemistry courses at the community college, and they count towards your high school diploma as well as your college degree. So that's the first approach for anyone that's still in college, still in high school level, is to get as much college credit as you can before even graduating from high school. The second thing is to think outside of the box. I'm 100% on board with everyone else here, and setting my children up for an opportunity to study outside of the United States. It's important to know that in Germany, the Netherlands, a lot of those schools have programs that are offered in English, because a lot of people thinking that they're not going to study outside of the United States because they don't speak the language of the host country. But a lot of those programs are available in English. So that's another option. And the third option, which she just touched on, is that a lot of employers, especially now, considering the cost of education in the United States, are offering to cover some of the costs of education or cover the cost of books. And so for someone that's already past that high school level, first year of college, it's find an employer that offers that as a benefit.
Wow.
Those are the 3 things I always recommend. But I definitely believe in looking outside of the box, outside the United States box.
It's terrifying to be in a situation where we have to plot and scheme almost before a child is even conceived. If the parents aren't sitting down with a battle map on the wall saying, all right, this is how we're going to attack this child's education over the next 18 years, because I have, most of my friends are people who make more than middle income, and even they can't afford to get their children a guaranteed education. I have a friend that told me the story about how his dad sat down with him when he was 18, 6 months from graduation. His sister was 16 and a half. They're almost exactly 2 years apart. He said his dad sat down with him and said, your mother and I, financially, we are okay. We've put a little bit of money away for education, but we're only going to be able to afford to get one of you through college. And because you're a man, we're going to put your sister through school. And he said, you know what, Dad, I totally understand. But it broke his dad's heart to have worked so hard, not to be rich, not to have a Mercedes or a gold watch, but to not even be able to afford in his own country where he's paid taxes and a diligent worker with a university education to not be able to guarantee his two children a university education.
I have to add on to that. Sorry. And this is the fourth thing I would always recommend. Do please, under no circumstances, co-sign on a loan, a student loan for a child to go to college. It's something that I've seen turn disastrous too many times.
You and I are on the same boat, because as a financial professional, I would have clients come to me and they would say, hey, my brother, sister, uncle, aunt, mother, father, son, daughter, wife, husband wants me to co-sign on this loan because I know I've got some money saved with you. What paperwork do I need for that? And do I need to alert you? I said, come to my office. We need to talk. Now, this is a conversation I've had many, many times. I'm just summarizing. And I would grab them by the shoulders and shake them as violently as possible, threatening them with severe bodily harm if they disobeyed me. You never co-sign a loan for anyone ever under any circumstance. And a lot of people, they don't want to listen. They believe that this is going to be different, or their heart is in the right place, and I believe they'll pay it back. Often the ability to pay that money back isn't even in their control. They don't even know. I told them, if you want to give them some money out of your account to go to college, I will cut you a check out of what you got invested with me. But you give it to them as a present, not as something you expect back. Otherwise, go ahead.
Sorry, go on. I think it's even worse for education, because I think in some senses, the school, I won't say, except because I don't have the numbers, that they're pushing this, but they have this government-funded federal plus loan, and it's the parent who co-signs, and they allow the children to go to school, whether or not the student finishes a degree, whether or not the school is open or closed, and then the parents can end up, losing their homes in the long run because they've co-signed for a loan funded by the government, who's going to get their money one way or the other. And it's a sad situation. So under no circumstances, please co-sign for a student loan.
Yeah, I've seen families ripped apart by that when the realization comes that money's never coming back, and now you've got a debt with someone who is arguably more violent than any gangster you'll ever come across. You're better off going down to the worst neighborhood you can find and finding a loan shark who will only break your legs and cut off your hands if you don't pay him back. Because the government will do much, much worse. And a lot of people don't know that until later. I have friends that didn't realize until they were 30 that debt they didn't pay back. Or my personal favorite, why is it that at 18 or 19 years old, they want to push credit cards on people while they're in university? You've already gotten sacked onto this loan. You've already gotten sacked onto this debt you can't pay back. By the way, we know you're not even smart enough, to run for governorship because you're not old enough, but we're going to get you this credit card with a couple $1,000s debt on it. Why? Because we think your parents statistically will pay it off for you, which is even more debt that we come across in school.
On that note, I have to jump off as well. But you guys have really enlightened me on a personal level. With my daughter, I'm going to recommend that she think about studying abroad. The other thing, I go back to Brazil and to Salvador in 3 weeks, and I can't help but think about the state of the educational system there. That's a whole nother conversation, but it's just this. What they don't have, I should say, what this public education in Brazil. And I mean, do you guys want to go there or not really at all?
Well, you know what? I've got nothing but time and patience. You're the one in a hurry. The beautiful part about the world today and the internet is that we have the time to actually dig into it. It's not like the old days when you got a 30-second clip on television and now we got to cut to sports. Go ahead and give us your reasoning.
So, well, which city are you in, Alenda?
I'm everywhere. Right now, I'm in Goiânia, but I spent quite a bit of time in Bahia, in and out of Sao Paulo, sometimes for business. But I consider my home states right now Goiás and Paraná, here in the south central west area.
Well, I mean, there's a part of me that has a passion to teach as many brown and Black Brazilians English as possible, to allow them to enter the global marketplace any way they can. And if I can touch, the children of tomorrow, today, that would make me very fulfilled. And I've only been in Brazil for 1 year. So I'm sure those of you who have been there much longer and who may have some foundations overlapping into the education arena as well. I'm just curious, as to your thoughts as to me, there's just this endless cycle. I mean, the poor are poor. They don't have access to quality education. They can't get into the university systems. And now you have what Mr. Bolsonaro has just done. And we saw certainly the pushback.
Wait,
and the
you can't say what President Bolsonaro did. You got to tell them what it was, because not everybody's in Brazil.
Oh, yes. Well, forgive me, because I'm not in Brazil at this very moment either, but I've been watching the news reports from there here. So I saw just this week a massive protest due to a 30% cut in educational services, but primarily, I want to say, in Brasilia, in Rio de Janeiro, and in Salvador, but I'm not sure. So I could use a little help from those of you who are in Brazil who might know a little bit more, to speak specifically to that point.
This is what I'd like to do. If the three of us, meaning anybody who wants to join, but primarily Alenda, Lisa, myself, if each one of us could bring one Brazilian friend into this conversation, because I'll tell you what I don't want to do. I don't want to be three Americans telling somebody in another country what they need to be doing.
Right.
So if we could bring in, I have a couple of friends who are educated, who know a little bit more about Brazil in a
Great
way.
idea.
If each one of us can be responsible for bringing one Brazilian friend to the chat next time we do this, to first and foremost help educate us from their point of view before we give our own, because I've lived in enough countries to know what it's like to see America or Americans go in and say, you know what, you guys are doing it wrong.
I agree. That's a very good recommendation.
So let's do that. The three of us will coordinate online, and we'll find a time we can all do it together. And anybody else can join, but our responsibility as the people in Brazil is to bring a Brazilian friend who can chat with us.
Love that.
All right, Lisa, you have a great day. Kisses.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. How do I hang up here?
Oh, wait, Lisa.
Yes.
Did you do Portuguese homework?
Today?
Did you do your Portuguese homework yesterday or today?
No.
Because for people who are listening, we have an accountability partner group that we're in, and every day we're posting our homework of what we, of our Portuguese language. And I noticed somebody didn't post their homework. I did mine. I got in at 11:30 p.m. right at the buzzer.
I saw you. You're so funny. Yes, I have 2 days worth to catch up. It's because it's a long story, but my granddaughters are here.
Your granddaughter threw your phone through the window. It's always an excuse. Okay.
Okay, but I'll see you online, okay?
Bye-bye, sweetie.
Okay, bye. How do I hang up? Oh, I see.
That's what. Wait. Hello, Roxana? You're waving goodbye. Gotcha.
No, I'm waving bye to Lisa. I'm here.
Oh, okay. I thought you were trying to get my attention. I was like, unmute yourself. What she said about the education system here, I don't want to pretend that I know enough about it to give an educated answer. That's why I said our responsibility, particularly as privileged Americans in another country, is to bring people in who do know more about it, who can help us with that information. I can tell you, I see a lot of the same discrepancies here as you see in a lot of major cities in the United States, like in Chicago, places where there's a very clear line on where education goes, where education doesn't go. Here they have exams that help people get through or into college, but if you haven't been preparing for that exam for years of your life, you may not get it. It gets very awkward. Have you seen that, Alenda?
Wait. Am I on? Yeah, I was going to say, I think the education system here is complex, and it's complex for a reason. It benefits, it could be considered a very strong education system for those who it benefits, but it doesn't benefit everybody, and there are different reasons for that. But I agree, we should bring some people in who are able to give the Brazilian perspective on it. But my children, I will say this, from my perspective, my children are here and learning Portuguese so that they are at least in an opportunity to benefit from a system that does have some benefits long term.
Such as?
Well, the federal education system at higher education, the university levels are public. They are free for those who are able to get in. Which is a big contrast from the United States.
Yeah.
And there are some very good research institutions in Brazil as well.
Well, I'm figuring out over and over again, it's like you said, you, and this is not a pointed you with a capital Y, it's like you as an American with a daughter, you can, and I'm not asking you to disclose anything that you're uncomfortable with, but you can make sure that because you and I are on the other side of the spectrum, if I had children, or because you do have children, we can really maximize that system. It's no different from business. I tell people all the time, I will never complain about Brazil. I do something, and I explain this to my friends, I call charge it to the game. I've never been robbed. I've never been pickpocketed. But if I did, I would never complain, because the number of advantages I get as an American living here, understanding how to navigate systems so different on a global scale, that it's almost like it's almost free. You know, and that's part of the privilege that we really do get to have, and we have to really acknowledge that. You know, your child will get, your daughter, how many do you have? 4 children?
You're so funny. I have 2.
Okay.
I mean, it feels like 4, but they're 2.
I have a friend of mine. I didn't know he only had 2 kids, because he always talks about them like they're this team of marauders that came down from the hills to like raid his home and his living room. He's like, wait, there's one over there and there's one over here and they're gonna get me. And it's like, you only have 2 children, but then I don't have any. So to me, kids are great, because when you don't have any, I love playing with other people's kids and giving them back, but I don't have to live with them. So I want to make sure that as we wrap up, at least the part that we came here for, the part about the education, there's never going to be a definite answer to any of the questions that I ask with everybody here. But I'm glad to be able to dig into this with you. Now, I'm not saying you guys got to go home or anything, but I often want to, at the end, I want to do a for the good of the order. Is there anything that's just been popping up in anybody's mind, in culture, reading, anything that you guys wanted to talk about or bounce off of people who may be in different places?
I'll just express my point of view. I think we really focused on higher education, like college, university level. But for me, there is a difference between getting a degree and getting an education. And I think, at least in the United States, and I'll speak because I'm from Florida, that there has been an enormous increase over the last 5 years amongst families of all color, but especially amongst families of color, that there's been an increase in homeschooling. And so I think what we're looking at from a lot of different points of view is that the education system, as we all agree on in the United States, has some very big gaps and very big flaws. And that learning is something that can take a lot of different colors, you know, like there's not one way to accomplish something. And so it's important for us to think outside of the box and to learn about what our options are to provide the best education for our children and for ourselves.
I think you're right. We were talking about higher education quite a bit, and we forget about, well, I have friends who are professional teachers in the United States, and they tell me something that I've seen play out, and I'd love your opinion on it, both of you as mothers, and maybe as well as somebody who's got higher education. They always told me that from the age of 0 to 3rd grade, children learn how to read. However, from the 3rd grade for the rest of your life, you read in order to learn. And that the advantage I had, by the time I was 3, I was an advanced reader, so I could simply pick up information. But what I keep seeing over and over again is all my friends who are teachers in their first couple of years, this is when we were younger, would go through this real issue of understanding they had children in their class that would never catch up. That by the time you get someone, I have a friend who was a 10th and 11th grade science teacher and history teacher who went on to the financial industry that I was in, but he said it broke his heart to realize I'm looking at a kid in 10th grade and I know for certain he'll never make it. Because by the time he got to me, he couldn't even read at 10th, he couldn't even read at 8th grade level. You know, and how did he get through the American education system? How did that happen?
Well,
Go on.
Well, I was going to say that I won't say never. They'll never make it. The biggest factor for most people are time and money. So sometimes you see people who enter the correction system in the United States where they have a lot of extra time and they come out educated, higher educated than they ever imagined they would have accomplished in their life. So there are a lot of different factors. There's time, there's resources, there's money. So I don't know. I don't want to ever count anybody out, but I do think that the education system, as it is, does leave a lot to be desired.
Wow.
I can tell you about one school in India which is very famous, where the kids don't learn anything until the age of 12. They just eat, play, sleep. They don't learn anything.
And your daughter is going to hijack your computer. And so have we had enough time with those graduates? How do those graduates fare in the open market? and at the university level?
Are you asking me?
Yeah. Of course, I'm asking you. You're the person who just talked about the school.
Yeah. What did you say? What was your question?
I said, have we had enough time looking at the results from that school to see how those children fare in the open business market in India and on a global scale?
Well, I don't know about this particular school, but there was another school that I was familiar with because I had a classmate during my bachelor from this school, which had a similar philosophy about teaching. And this girl was, this classmate that I was talking about, it's a girl, and she was the top in the class. I mean, these schools, they have this philosophy that, for example, you shouldn't teach anything until the brain develops to a certain level. And apparently, until 12 years old, the brain doesn't develop to a level where they can actually learn things properly. So they let them just do what kids are supposed to do, that is play, eat, sleep properly. So the brain develops in the right way. And once it reaches a certain level, then they start teaching.
Okay.
But I think that's the key question, right? Is we don't have the data yet on how effective these types of programs, which are increasing every day, are. I've seen a lot of increase, a lot of online murmur about the open, free thinking, free range, free range, whatever we want to call them, children who don't focus on, or I guess the way to put it is that when we learn best based on what, I'm sorry, I have a lot of noise over here. We learn based on what interests us. And so a lot of times that we're pushing people into careers or higher education before they have an opportunity to develop what they are even naturally interested in or naturally excel at. And so that's why there's this increase in those types of learning institutions. It's allowing children to just be children until they're at a point where they can focus on the things that interest them or come naturally to them, or once their brains are able to, until their brains are able to absorb material in a way that is beneficial in the long term. I mean, how much of what we learned in school do we really remember anyway?
Well, I don't know. Here's the problem. Uh-oh, you muted yourself? Okay, because I thought you got disconnected. I was so used to the background. Here's what I keep finding over and over again. The people who talk about how an education might not have been important are always people that have an education. I don't know anyone who didn't get to go to college that says, let me rephrase that. I've seen very few people. You do have a couple of people who are very famous that said college wasn't necessary. But for the average person of average intelligence and average opportunity, I don't know anybody who says, I'm glad I didn't go to college so I could have this regular job in a regular supermarket, fast food restaurant, or, factory line worker. And I keep seeing that over and over again.
Yeah, you're mixing up college and early education. They are not the same
thing. Perhaps. Listen, I got to get out of here. I got a lot of stuff that's happened. One of the things that I definitely want to do is, Eshwar, you and I have to talk about your book about negotiation. We have to do a one-on-one about that because I want to raise some points about it. And second, Alenda, well, let me back up. Alenda, do you have any social media you want to promote? Anything, any places where you do your own writing or your own, anything you want us to put up?
No, I don't. I keep a low profile. Okay,
well, going online with me is not a low profile, but I understand. The thing I want to say is, Alenda said sometime this week what I'd like to do is I really do want to sit down and you and I can really unpack the arcane secrets of money and law together. And
I think that would be beneficial and rewarding.
When are you going to come down to Sao Paulo and hang out?
Probably in the month of July. I think I'm scheduled to be back there. The end of July.
Are you going to bring a tribe?
They go everywhere I go. We're a team. We're a package deal.
All right. Everybody have a great day and thank you. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.